he had 4 wives, he's wrestled with lions, just did all the things that people did in the period and did them better.
Robert James Fitzsimmons was born into humble beginnings on the 26th of May 1863 in Helston, Cornwall, England. He was the youngest of 7 boys and 5 girls born to James and Jane Fitzsimmons. In 1873, the family moved. James, Jane and their youngest 5 children sailed on the 93-day-long journey to Lyttelton, New Zealand. Once Fitzsimmons had completed his education, he took on a range of jobs. He wanted to do something as a sailor, hoping that it would toughen him up for a career in boxing. However, the ship on which he was supposed to work was damaged and couldn't sail. Instead, he took on a range of jobs. He was a butcher's delivery boy, a carriage painter, a striker at an iron foundry, and a decorator, before eventually becoming an apprentice at his family's blacksmithing forge with his brother Jarrett. It is said his time working in blacksmiths' forges helped him to develop his upper body, particularly his arms and his shoulders. During his time working in the blacksmith's forge, there are stories that Fitzsimmons was not averse to fighting quarrelsome and often drunk customers, and it was suggested that this even boosted business as customers returned to the forge hoping to see a fight. Fitzsimmons' boxing career started when, in the early 1880s, Gypsy Jem Mace, an English bare-knuckle boxer, travelled to New Zealand. Fitzsimmons' hometown was the location of his boxing school and the first boxing championships ever held in New Zealand. Fitzsimmons entered the tournament and knocked out 4 opponents on his way to winning the competition. He even successfully defended his title in the following year. Upon becoming a professional, Fitzsimmons moved to Australia and had his first 28 definite professional fights there. During this time, he'd established his own style. He developed a certain movement and caginess from one of the greatest bare-knuckle fighters, Jem Mace. Mace encouraged Fitzsimmons to develop this technique further, drawing on the enormous power he had gained from blacksmithing. Fitzsimmons could deliver short, accurate, and occasionally conclusive punches, and built up a reputation as by far the hardest puncher in boxing. By 1890, Fitzsimmons had moved to the United States. He fought 4 times that year, winning 3 and drawing 1. Then, on the 14th of January 1891, Fitzsimmons' moment arrived. In New Orleans, he won his first world title from Jack Dempsey. Fitzsimmons knocked out Dempsey, from whom the later Jack Dempsey took his name, in the 13th round to become the world middleweight champion. Fitzsimmons knocked Dempsey down at least 13 times in the fight, and by the finish left him in such a pitiable condition that he begged for him to quit. Since Dempsey would not do so, Fitzsimmons knocked him out and then carried him to his own corner. He spent the next 2 years fighting non-title bouts and exhibitions until eventually giving Hall a chance at the title in 1893. Other distractions affected his life. At a public sparring performance on the 16th of November 1894 at Jacob's Opera House, Syracuse, New York, Fitzsimmons knocked out sparring partner Con Riordan, who was carried off unconscious and died several hours later. Eventually, Fitzsimmons vacated the middleweight title and instead began campaigning at heavyweight, as the light heavyweight division did not exist at that time. On the 2nd of December 1896, the San Francisco Athletic Club sponsored a fight at the Mechanics Pavilion in San Francisco between Fitzsimmons and the famous Tom Sharkey. Fitzsimmons was taller and quicker than Sharkey, and he was dominating the fight from the opening bell. Then, in the 8th round, Fitzsimmons hit Sharkey with his famed solar plexus punch, an uppercut under the heart that could render a man temporarily helpless. The punch caught Sharkey and the referee Earp, and most of the crowd by surprise, and Sharkey dropped, clutched his groin, and rolled on the canvas, screaming foul. The referee stopped the bout and ruled that Fitzsimmons had hit Sharkey with a low blow. His ruling was greeted with loud boos and catcalls. According to contemporary accounts, very few witnessed the foul the referee had ruled on. He awarded the decision to Sharkey, who attendants carried out as limp as a rag. Eventually, Fitzsimmons' luck at heavyweight would change when, in 1896, he won a disputed version of the World Heavyweight Championship title in a fight at Langtry, Texas, against the Irish fighter Peter Mayer. On the 17th of March 1897 in Carson City, Nevada, he knocked out American Jim Corbett, generally recognised as the legitimate world heavyweight champion, having won that title from John L. Sullivan in 1892 in the 14th round. This was a remarkable achievement, as Jim Corbett, who was also a skilled boxer, weighed 1 stone 3 pounds more than Fitzsimmons. During the fight, he outboxed Fitzsimmons for several rounds, knocked him down in the 6th round and badly damaged his face with his jab, left hook and right hand combination. But Fitzsimmons kept coming and Corbett began to tire. In the 14th round, Fitzsimmons won the title with his solar plexus punch. The infamous solar plexus punch is in full view in this old and worn but nevertheless interesting film footage. He spent the rest of 1897 and 1898 doing stage tours. Then, in 1899, Fitzsimmons fought James Jeffries at the Coney Island Athletic Club near Brooklyn, New York. Most people gave the challenger Jeffries little chance, even though at over 15 stones he massively outweighed his smaller opponent and he was far younger. Jeffries lifted the World Heavyweight Championship from Fitzsimmons with an unexpected 11th round knockout. Fitzsimmons carried on boxing, but in 1901 he published a book, Physical Culture and Self-Defense. Then, in 1902, he and Jeffries had a rematch. Once again, the World Heavyweight Championship was at stake. In the early rounds, Fitzsimmons battered Jeffries, who suffered horrible punishment. With his nose and cheekbones broken, most would have sympathised with Jeffries had he quit. But he kept going until his enormous strength and youth wore down Bob and he knocked him out cold in round 8. Many people would be forgiven for thinking his career was over. But then, in November 1903, Fitzsimmons made history by defeating world light heavyweight champion George Gardner, also known as Gardner, by a decision in 20 rounds, becoming the first boxer to win titles in 3 weight divisions, and to this day he is the only fighter to go down from heavyweight to light heavyweight and win a world title. Soon afterwards, he went back to the heavyweight division, where he kept fighting until 1914, with mixed results. In 1907, at age 44, Fitzsimmons fought the much younger Jack Johnson during the time period in which reigning champion James Jeffries refused to fight him. The bout between Johnson and Fitzsimmons ended in victory for Johnson with a 2nd round knockout, and clearly, by this point in his career, the end was close. The footage you see here is Fitzsimmons against Bill Lang, a respected journeyman from Australia. The fight took place in the year 1909, towards the end of Fitzsimmons' career, and you can clearly see he's well past his prime, with Bill Lang eventually getting the better of him and knocking him out. Bob "Ruby" Fitzsimmons had a final professional record of 66 wins with 59 by knockout, 8 losses, 4 draws, 19 no contests and 2 no decisions. His exact record remains unknown, as the boxing world often kept records poorly during this era, but Fitzsimmons said he'd had more than 350 fights, which could have involved exaggeration on his part, but is nevertheless plausible. It's also possible that Bob may have included his many exhibition bouts in his final total. He led an interesting life and was married 4 times and had 6 children, 4 of whom managed to survive infancy. Sadly, he died of pneumonia on the 22nd of October 1917 in Chicago. As a result of his lifestyle choices, having 4 wives, a gambling problem and a susceptibility to confidence tricksters, he did not hold on to his money for very long, and he died relatively impoverished. Bob Fitzsimmons left behind an incredible legacy. He was the first boxer to be a world champion in 3 weight classes. He was the first boxer to win titles in both middleweight and heavyweight divisions. He remains to this day the only person to drop down from the heavyweight division to the light heavyweight division in order to win a world title. He remains one of only 2 people to be undisputed champion in 3 separate weight classes. And his record is an excellent one and features all-time greats such as Jack Johnson, James Corbett and James Jeffries.